Okay, so today we're going to be talking about directional terms. Directional terms can help us know how things are oriented. These could be internal structures of an organ, how organs are related location-wise to one another, how bones are related to one another, all that good stuff. So the first pair of directional terms that we're going to talk about are superior and inferior. Inferior means below. Superior means above. So when we're talking about a human, superior is going to be related towards like the head into the body. So if we were using this directional term in action, we could say something like the skull is superior to the clavicle. Okay, so the skull is above the clavicle. Now, the next term we said is inferior, and that's going to mean below. In humans, it's going to mean towards the toe end of the body. So, if we wanted to, we could come down here and we could say the tibia is inferior or below the femur. Now, if we're talking about an animal, they're oriented a little bit differently. Instead of having superior and inferior as their terms, like above and below, they have two terms, cephalad, towards the head, and caudal, which means towards the tail. All right, so our next two directional terms are going to be anterior, towards the front of the body, and posterior. Posterior means towards the back of the body. If we wanted to look at these directional terms in action, we're looking here at that center model. We could say something like the breastbone is anterior to the spine, so it's towards the front. We could also say things like the scapula is posterior to the humerus, so it's behind, it's towards the back side of the body. If we were talking about animals, if we were talking about towards the front of the body, we would be saying something like ventral, that's the belly side, and towards the back of the body would be called dorsal. Think like a dolphin's dorsal fin, it's on the back side. All right, so our next two directional terms are medial, meaning towards the midline of the body, and lateral, which is meaning away from the midline of the body. We could look here and see our directional terms in action. This is the midline of the body, obviously. Oops, I am not doing that centrally. Okay, and we could say something like the navel is medial to the external oblique muscles. So it's closer to the midline than the external oblique muscles. We could look up here at the head, and on the face, right in the center, smack dab along that midline, is the nose. Okay? If we look on the outside of the head, we have the ears. The ears are lateral away from the midline. So the ears are lateral to the nose. Okay, the next two directional terms that we're going to talk about are superficial, which means towards the outside of the body, and deep. Okay, deep means like deep within the body, so away from the outside of the body. The easiest thing that we could say that is superficial, an example here is the skin. The skin is superficial to the muscle. It's more out towards the outside of the body than the muscle is. If we wanted to give an example of something that's deep, we could look here. Okay, so we have the lungs here on the outside. If I pull those off, underneath is the heart. The heart is deep to the lungs. The heart is deep, it's closer towards the inside of the body than the lungs, as the lungs are on top of the heart, right? Our last two directional terms are proximal, which means to be close to the trunk or near the trunk, and distal. Distal means to be away from the trunk. Okay, so let's look at these last two directional terms in action. Okay, so if we wanted to say something about being proximal and distal, we could say here's our humerus. Okay, the head of the humerus right here is proximal, closer to the trunk of the body than the olecranon fossa. Okay, so what we see is the olecranon fossa, this little divot back here, that is farther away from the trunk than the head of the humerus. So because the head of the humerus is closer to the trunk than the olecranon fossa, the head of the humerus is proximal to the olecranon fossa. Okay, so this was one that we could do that would be kind of the last directional term. Using the word distal, we could say the ankle is distal. Oops. To the knee. So the ankle is farther away from the trunk than the knee would be. And sorry, there's actually no patella there. It's kind of missing in our model. Okay, so distal means to be farther away from the trunk.